Friends, welcome back. Today I have another monthly wrap up. Today we're going to be talking about the 8 books that I finished in the month of August. Let's get into it. Okay, so as I said, I finished 8 books this month, and I don't know what it was. Maybe it's just like the summer or something, but I just could not sit still to finish a physical book. Like, I literally only finished one book in physical form, but that's not because I didn't start them. There were several books that I started the physical copies of it, and I just could not get through it. So 7 of these books I ended up finishing via audio, and only the very last book did I actually read the whole thing cover to cover in physical form. So yeah, anyways. Book number 1. So the first book I finished was Such a Fun Age by Reid. This book I've seen hyped up all over the place. This was one of Reese's book club picks a few months ago, and I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was okay. Basically, the premise of the story is there's this African-American nanny to this white toddler, and basically what happens is she ends up going to the grocery store, and it's late at night and with this child, and she gets accused of like stealing the baby, and kind of the story unfolds from there. I thought this book did raise a lot of really important issues, and it did really make me think about things in a different way. I think this book is very reminiscent of the movie Get Out. It's not as crazy as that movie, but it has some similarities. And I thought that like it raised a lot of important things. It talks about important issues, and at the same time, it was still easy and fun and kind of like a quick read. That being said, I feel like the actual storyline was just a little bit ho-hum, you know what I mean? Like it didn't really stand out to me in terms of the storyline, the plot, but yeah. Anyway, number 2. I don't have my glasses on, so I literally cannot even see my screen in front of me. Toxic Charity. Yeah, so the next book I read was called Toxic Charity. This is a book that I actually found from Hiram's YouTube channel. If you don't know him, he does like skincare videos. And basically this book talks about how charities, in particularly like mission trips and like mission-based charities, oftentimes end up doing more harm than good, and they kind of takes away empowerment from the people that they're trying to help. Oftentimes those kind of trips are really more for the benefit of the people going rather than the people who are on the other end of that trip. And in reality, if we were trying to help those people that we're supposedly trying to help, there's a lot of better ways to go about doing that. I think this book talks about a lot of really important things, and it's stuff that I think a lot of times we don't necessarily think about or don't want to think about, especially if you are someone who has been involved in these types of mission trips, especially with like church groups and schools are often like who is going on these mission trips. And I think this book raises a ton of important things related to this topic, so I think it's worth reading. However, I only gave it 3 stars for a few reasons. First of all, I think they could have made it a little bit more interesting, like jazzed it up with some more stories and kind of that kind of stuff. It just, I don't know, the writing was just a little bit not that interesting. Also, I found that some of the writing just felt a little bit kind of condescending. Like it was just, like, I know the author, like his head was in the right place of like, we don't want to like disempower these people, but it also came across kind of like, oh, well, like I know what's best for them and it's not this, it's this. And like, I get where his head was at. I feel like some of the actual writing came out kind of wrong, but all that aside, I think this book is still worth reading if you're interested in kind of the dark side of charity and kind of how charities are more of like an industry in a lot of cases than we might want to believe. So yeah, that was the next book. Moving on, the next book I read was His and Hers by Alice Feeney. I won't go into a ton of detail because I did make a 3-minute thriller review on this book. So if you want to hear my thoughts on this book, check out that video. All I'm going to say is this book, I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did. It was kind of the book where it started out like a 3-star, moved up to a 4-star, and by the end of it, I was at 5-star territory. So I did give this book 5 stars. It is a mystery thriller, and I would really recommend it. And check out my other video if you want to know more about why I liked it so much. So the next book I read was All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. This book, again, is a book that I've seen all over BookTube. I've seen so many people rave about this book. Basically what it is, it's a memoir, and I think it's targeted a little bit more towards being a young adult memoir. Basically, the author talks about his story being a young Black teenager, and he was kind of discovering his own sexual identity, coming into the identity of being queer, and how that intersection of being Black and queer really influenced him, and basically was a challenging intersection to be in. And he talks about that when he was young, he didn't have a lot of role models to look up to that fit that kind of same identity that he had, that he could really look up and see himself in. And so because of that, he wanted to write this memoir for other young people who kind of can identify with him or are struggling with their own identity, that they can kind of look up to him. I think for its intended audience, this book could easily be a 5-star book. However, I have to acknowledge that I'm not part of the target audience on this one, so I don't know if it's really fair for me to give like too critical of a judgment of this book. However, I feel like as someone who does read pretty critically nowadays, I feel like the book was kind of lacking a bit more of like a narrative structure. Like it felt a little bit repetitive. A lot of the stories he was talking about just felt a little bit mundane. I don't know. Like, again, that's just my opinion. As I said, I'm not part of the target audience for this book. So, I'm glad this book does exist for the people who need it and for people who can look up to him and kind of see themselves, reflected in him. So I'm glad that this book exists for them. But for me, it wasn't really my favorite. I ended up with 3 stars for this book. Okay, anyway, let's move on to The Night Swim. This is another book that I made a whole separate 3-minute thriller review on, so check that out if you want more details. Long story short, this book is about a podcast host who is covering a rape trial in a small town, and when she's at the small town, she uncovers that there's actually a whole backstory of this other case that is potentially a murder. She's not really sure, but it took place decades in the past, and basically she's trying to uncover what happens with this rape trial as well as what happened all those years ago with that other case. I thought this book was okay. I gave it 3 stars. Check out my other video to know more about why I thought that. The next book that I finished was Too Much and Never Enough: How My Family Created the Most Dangerous Man. This is the new book by Mary Trump, who is Donald Trump's niece. Okay, here are my thoughts about this book. So I feel like there is a reason why when you're like applying for a job or applying to school and you have to submit a recommendation about yourself, normally you're not really allowed to or supposed to submit recommendations from your own family. And normally that is just because when someone's in your family, there are personal relationships, personal feelings towards that person that can make that recommender or that family member, look at you in a way that's maybe not all that objective. You know what I mean? They may overlook some of your flaws. They may be more willing to help you. And, that personal relationship can kind of blind objectivity in a lot of cases. And I feel like normally this is on the positive side. Normally your family is going to say even more positive things about you than the average person would say. With Mary Trump, I feel like this concept is still true, but it's kind of the opposite side of things. Like, she has such this personal relationship to this family that she kind of misses some objectivity, I think, in her portrayal of Donald Trump. I think she came across as just kind of bitter and spiteful towards the whole family based on stuff that happened to her and her father, who was Donald Trump's brother. And I think she just comes across like super bitter in this book, and it made it like not that enjoyable to get through, in my opinion. That was my first problem with it. My second problem is, like, when you read this, she's clearly just capitalizing on her relationship with the Trump family, and it's election season, blah blah blah. So obviously that is a huge coup to sell books, and I think she kind of capitalized on that, even though in reality she doesn't really have much of a relationship with Donald Trump. she talks about in this book, like she basically had some like somewhat close interactions when she was much younger, but she hasn't been in close contact with him for, I think, decades prior to him running for president. So I feel like she has these like personal negative relationships with the whole family. And so she has this like negative view that she's viewing him. And she's also like, I don't know, I feel like she kind of blows things out of proportion. Like she literally takes this instance where Donald Trump was, I think she said he was only 7 years old. 7 years old. And he threw this temper tantrum at the dinner table. And there's practically like a whole chapter about that. How like this shows that he's some kind of like sociopath or something. I'm like, okay, I don't know. Like it just seemed like overkill in my opinion. And don't get me wrong, like I'm not really a Trump supporter. I don't think I will be voting for him. So I'm not trying to defend him and say like, oh my God, she's like a scumbag fake news. I don't think that, but I think that this kind of, as I said, I think it's hard for someone who has a family relationship with someone to really be objective when they are critiquing them. And I think because of that, this book didn't have a lot of really solid critiques about Donald Trump as a person, as a leader. It was more focused on just her own personal experiences. It was more focused on the family dynamics, largely which didn't even include Donald's. They included like the other family members. So I don't know. I wasn't crazy about this book. I ended up giving it 2 stars. That was probably more of an explanation that you needed, but yeah, it was like kind of entertaining. They had some interesting stories in here, but overall I wouldn't really recommend it, to be honest. So the next book that I finished was The Vanishing Half by Bennett, which is here. Again, this is another book I've read like the first like few chapters physically, but then the rest of it I just listened to on Audible. And basically the story, it's about these 2 twins who are Black, but they are very light-skinned and they can pass as white. And one of the twins ends up living as a Black woman, and then the other woman kind of transitions her life into being kind of embodying a white woman, and she lives a white life, and it kind of follows several generations of their family. I thought this book was good. I thought it was enjoyable. It made me think about things. It was thought-provoking. It didn't really stand out to me as like a 5-star book, so I ended up with 4 stars for this book. So yeah. Anyway, finally, this book was actually able to get me out of my reading slump where I just could not finish any physical books. This book I actually did read the whole thing in physical form because I just liked it so much. This book is The Beauty in Breaking by Michelle Harper. So Michelle Harper is an emergency room doctor, and this book is a memoir of her experience being an emergency room doctor. Still finishing this. Okay, I don't want that. Like you're filming this.
Here comes the choo-choo train.
Go away.
One more bite for you.
Yes.
Delicious.
Oh, wait. That's warm. And it's kind of her experience being an emergency room doctor. She works in like a traditional, like big hospital. She also works for the VA hospital. And it's kind of her experience being a new doctor. It talks about her experience being an African-American woman in a male, white-dominated profession. It talks about that. It also talks about like her personal life. It talks about how she got divorced and kind of had to like rebuild her life and kind of find herself after that. And this book was just so good. It was the kind of book where I kind of forgot about the page numbers. Like I wasn't even looking at it. I was just so engrossed. This book, it's like easy to get through, but it's very deep and like thought-provoking and just beautiful. Like I thought this book was really beautifully written. Each chapter is kind of devoted to basically like a different case or like patient that she had basically. And yeah, this book I got through Book of the Month, and I would highly recommend this book. This was such a good way to end the month. And yeah, this was just a really great book. Anyways, that brings my list to a close. So I would love to know in the comments, number 1, have you read any of these books? And if not, if you've not read any of them, let me know which one looks most interesting to you or which one you would be most interested in reading. Yeah, I would love to know. And if you like to see these videos every month, subscribe for more. As you can see, I love to read mysteries, thrillers, memoirs, narrative nonfiction. That's kind of my jam. So check out my channel for more of that kind of thing. And yeah, that's it. Bye guys.